Welcome back, everybody. This Week in America online, thisweekinamerica.us. Author Margaret Goka shares her mind, heart, and memories in her book, The Woven Flag. In this collection of poems, the author talks of home and family, places, animals, inspiration, questions, and answers. By being a devoted and loving mother, what better way to begin her compilation than with poems by a young mother? It's an excellent book of poems called a welcome addition to any poetry lover's collection. Margaret left home in Maryland to attend college in St. Louis, Missouri at Washington University, majoring in English literature. Afterwards, she moved to California, completed a M.A. in Linguistics at San Jose State University, taught English as a second language at Evergreen Valley College. She now has 3 daughters, 6 grandchildren, has written poetry since she was young and wrote these poems as her children grew up and established their own separate lives. She collected the poems written since she came to California in the book The Woven Flag that we're talking about on today's program. Welcoming back to This Week in America, Margaret Goka. Margaret, welcome back to the show. Great to have you with us once again.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
This book is really so relatable and inspirational, and I mentioned that you share your mind, your heart, and your memories. You really do that, don't you? This has to be rewarding that you're able to share these memories and get the positive feedback from people that can relate to your life and your situations.
Well, I was reaching out to others as I wrote them, and I'm glad that they can relate to them and find something in it that speaks to their selves.
Yeah, this goes back, as I said, to when the kids were young and you were writing down these poems. Was there a particular point when you thought, I've got all of these, maybe I'll publish a book with all the poems that I have, or did it just sort of evolve over the years of writing the poetry?
Well, I had a habit of sitting down and writing poetry, and they just accumulated, but I was too busy with the kids and with teaching to compile them. So when I finally retired, I had time to look at them and see that they fell into different categories and sort them so that similar poems were together and make them into something readable to other people.
Well, yeah, we can follow the evolution of the family. And again, it's so relatable because there are experiences that we all can relate to. Talk about how you went about laying out the book. You mentioned that you have it organized in 6 different sections. Talk about that because you break down all these different aspects, and it's very easy to follow by doing this. And if you want to go back and read a particular poem in a particular section, you can find it very easily.
Yeah, well, I kept my poems together, but I typed them up as I went along, but I found I had a lot to retype, and then they were just in a bunch by chronology, and I had to figure out what the themes were, and so I saw I had a lot of poems about my children, so they became the beginning of the book, and then the other poems were some were about places I remembered, others were questions, and a number of them were about my family, my other family members.
And we feel like we know them after and we can not only feel like we know them, we probably have members of our family that we can relate to as we're hearing the ones described that you talk about. Margaret Goka is our guest on the program. That's Goka. Her website is margaretgoka.com. The book, The Woven Flag, is available at bookventure.com. It's available wherever books are sold. You can link on directly by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. The one thing that jumps out as every time I read the poetry, and this is the second program we've done with Margaret, is descriptions. I can actually see what you're talking about in writing the poem. Talk about how you go about doing that, because you paint in very few words. You paint a picture so it's quite vivid as we're reading it.
Well, often that something that I was looking at inspired me to write about what I saw, and sometimes they were memories of things I had seen, and I was trying to bring back to my memory what it was that was special about a place. I do write one poem called The Rose, which is about sitting at the table, and the rose, a rose in a vase is in front of me, and I write about the things I see behind it, which are pictures that bring certain memories back to me.
Yeah, what was this experience like for you when you decided I'm going to go through and sort of curate the collection that I have here? I imagine this was a time where the memories came rushing back as you wrote and you remember not only the story but probably where you were and when you wrote the story.
Well, I guess being very busy, you really relish the time you have to just sit back and reflect on things.
Yes.
And so if you write something down at the same time, it kind of enhances it and doesn't slip away from you the way it does if you don't write anything down.
The book is receiving excellent reviews. One review talked about quoting an Italian author saying, "We do not remember days, we remember moments." And you do an excellent job of capturing those moments, those everyday moments when things happen that we reflect on later in many cases a very positive way. Talk about that, because these are not like big picture. These are taking things like the rose. These are taking things like enjoying coffee and wine, a few moments with your young children. You really talk about those special moments, don't you?
Yeah, well, that's the great thing about poetry is that it's very limited and can focus on something intensely. You don't have to spin a tale and keep going. It's finished at the end of a page or two, and so it fits into a busy life. I recommend poetry for people who are busy writing poetry.
You know, that's interesting because you don't have like 6 chapters you want to get finished today. You can finish the poem with the right words and get on with your life, can't you? It's not like you actually have to spend a lot of time in front of the computer in cranking out 120 pages.
Yes, I think when I began writing poetry, I often would revise it and change it a lot. Now, then a certain point arrived when I could kind of get out what I wanted, and it would be a full poem, and I recognized it had a beginning and an ending and could stop there, and it didn't need too much changing.
Well, that's interesting because I think, everybody wants to go back and they do re-editing and they're going back and trying to rework it. Those were your initial thoughts. That really counts for something, doesn't it? That was your reaction at the time when you first wrote that poem.
Yes, I think it makes it a little fresher.
Yes, the book we're talking about, is called The Woven Flag. Margaret Fourt Goka is the author. That's Goka. Her website is margaretgoka.com. Go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and you can link up directly with Margaret's website. Talk about the poem for children, because this really was what? This was the inspiration for the name of the book.
Well, yes. The woven flag was an idea that my father was always talking about. He would tell an anecdote, and he would say that there was a loom in New York that could weave the American flag, and I was always this was repeated often, and I remember this about him. But I talk about the children being like flags that I wove, and it's just sort of a nonsense poem where the children speak and they ask for snacks, and it's just a sort of counting the 3 children and feeling happy about it.
And The Woven Flag is the name of the book by Margaret Goka. It's interesting the affection you have for nature, getting outdoors, and animals. Both of those aspects, nature and animals, have played a major part in your life and your family's as well.
Yes, I like having a companion animal, usually a cat. And I was raised by 2 scientists who were students of biology and chemistry, and they introduced me to the natural world and taught me about it and made me appreciate it.
And you capture it quite well in the book, The Woven Flag. The final poems in the collection been described as extremely poignant and extremely personal as well, Sun Sadness and Lost Singing. Talk about those, because these are remembrances of your parents that you just mentioned and your husband as well.
Yes. Well, I was, of course, moved when my parents died, and and was a little bit hard to get going writing about it. But then, as the years went by, it was easier. I have a picture of my mother in my mind, sitting at the dining room table smoking, and it always comes to my mind, and so I use that describe that in a poem.
Being able to capture those memories is so important. And even though we were not familiar with your situation or your mother, we read that and suddenly we're able to visualize relatives that we had and how they impacted our lives. I mentioned in the beginning this fascination, this talent for poetry began at an early age. Talk about that. How old were you when you first decided I really like this form of writing?
Well, I was read to a lot by members of my adults in my family, and I tried my hand at poetry. I guess maybe it's starting in junior high, and I wrote poetry that rhymed. And then later, when I was in college, I was introduced to poetry that doesn't rhyme, free verse. And I found it so much easier to get my thoughts out if I didn't have to worry about rhyming. I just loved writing poetry. I've always enjoyed it.
It's a really effective way to write, isn't it? I can remember at an early age almost being taught that poetry is something it's difficult. Sometimes you're not going to be able to understand it. And they sort of took the fun away from it. As you get older and you don't have those restraints as you're reading, your mind really goes to a different place, and you're really able to move people in a different fashion, don't you think?
Yes. I enjoy reading poetry myself. I know a lot of people don't read it because they think it's too hard, but it's sort of like looking at pictures in a gallery or in a book of reproductions of paintings or something like that. They're sort of like paintings.
What do you think the younger students now, those in school, maybe even your grandkids, do they have that appreciation for poetry, do you think?
I think my children do write poetry. They haven't let me read it, but I think they write it.
Well, they're saving that till later. Then they'll decide to go back and put them in order and publish them like you did. Now, I think I mentioned this is the second book of poetry that you did. Talk about the first one.
My first book was called Chrysalis, and it was poems written when I was in college and the first year or two of my marriage. Afterwards, I'm not thinking about the book right now. It's sort of hard to remember.
Well, it was a long time ago, and the new book is The Woven Flag. Are you working on more poetry now?
Yes, I still write from time to time, and after I published the book, I went back and looked in old journals where I would journal for a while and then start writing a poem, and I found a few, but I don't have very many, I don't have a book's worth now. I've got to keep working on it.
Yeah, do you still write on I'm going to say on a daily basis, but on a regular basis when you see something that inspires you, do you go back and try to capture that in a poem?
I don't set aside a certain time to write or write on a daily basis. It's more like getting in a certain frame of mind where I want to think back on something or capture a picture of something, and then I'll sit down and do it.
I would imagine
I want to speak to somebody who's not there. It's sort of like writing a letter to somebody.
Okay, I never thought about that, but yes, that's a great way to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
With the grandchildren, I would assume this gives you great information there as well, great resources when you're writing a poem, just to sort of document it in poetic form what their lives are like.
Yes, I have a lot of grandchildren now, so that's another source of inspiration.
Well, yeah, this book has to be sort of like a great family legacy to them. What is their reaction to the book that our grandmother has written? And it tells me all about my mom, my dad as they were growing up, and it gives me some idea with the family. This has to be great for family members to look at.
I think I've showed them the poems about the children, but I'm not sure they've seen all of the poems. They approve of my writing, but I don't know what the answer to that is.
Well, yeah, it's up to them, but they have that there. They can go back and look at it and, and pass the book along to their children. The book is The Woven Flag. Margaret Fourt Goka is our guest on the program. Her website is Margaret Goka, Goka.com. The book's available at bookventure.com and the bookstore, of course, available at Amazon. You can link on directly by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. It's interesting, the hustle and the bustle. I mean, we see this whole transformation of the life, and you really do a good job of capturing that. When the kids were young, those were really hectic times for you. I'm surprised you found time at the end. Maybe you look forward to the time at the end of the day when you could sit by yourself and write the poetry.
Yes, well, there's a few hours if you stay up later than your children do in the evening. And then they do go to school, so school is while they're at school is a great time to sit down a little bit and write.
Well, it's interesting that you can do that because you were quite busy. You could always find a little bit of time to do something of a positive nature. And I would guess for you that was, I don't want to say necessarily therapeutic, but I'm sure that was good for you to go back and to recapture those moments that you vividly remember from, in some cases, even a few hours before.
It's really great. It's helpful to put something down on paper, and then you see what your thoughts are. When they're just rattling around in your head, they tend to disappear, and you can't get them back. But if you've written something down, you've got something real to look back on.
Does it help? I mentioned going through day to day, and you went through all of the situations we all go through. We've got highs, we've got lows, we have to deal with them. Does it help when you're able to go back and write those down? Maybe something you thought was a bad situation or it wasn't a pleasant situation. You write about it and suddenly it puts it in a whole new perspective.
Yes, it makes it easier for you to handle it, to get a grasp of it and maybe think of a solution to a problem.
It is an excellent book, and we'll have Margaret back on another program to talk a little bit more about some of the programs, some of the poems specifically. It's called, in one of the reviews, a welcome addition to any poetry lover's collection. The book we're talking about is The Woven Flag, written by Margaret Fourt Goka. That's F-O-U-R-T. Goka is G-O-K-A. You'll find the book available at bookventure.com in the bookstore, also available, of course, at Amazon, and link on directly to Margaret's website, which is margaretgoka.com, by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Margaret, a pleasure to have you back with us on the program. Much more we'll talk about when we talk again on the program. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing these remarkable stories.
You're very welcome.
Margaret Goka, our guest. The book is called The Woven Flag. Information at Margaret's website, margaretgoka.com. And, of course, you can link on by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Back on today's program right after these messages.